They fired me in front of the entire board, called me a disgrace to the family. My own brother smirked while my parents just watched. No support, no defense, just silence. Hi, I'm Lauren Chen. I used to think loyalty would earn me a seat at the table. But that day, I learned something far more valuable. Because when Grandpa's will was revealed, naming me the sole heir to an $85 million legacy, the silence turned to shock. What they didn't know was, I had never stopped fighting. Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments. And if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way, I can send you a special greeting. Now let's start the story together. I still remember the weight of silence just before the file hit the floor. Not the loud slam, but the hush that followed. A kind of sharp, airless pause. The pages fanned out like leaves in a storm I was standing right in the middle of. My father stood at the far end of the table, rigid as the glass walls behind him, his voice cold and precise. "You've humiliated us," he said. And just like that, I wasn't his daughter. I was the problem he had to erase. I stood frozen, my palms flat against the conference table, the marble cool beneath my fingers. I could hear the rain tapping on the windows, persistent and uninvited. The whole room had the chill of a place that had never known warmth. Brandon sat across from me, legs crossed, fingers steepled in front of him. He didn't speak right away. He didn't have to. The smirk on his face said everything. He finally said, tilting his head toward the scattered documents, who sells a maritime asset at half its value and still expects to keep their job? He looked at me like a teacher disappointed in a failing student. Only we weren't in a classroom. We were in the heart of Knighton Enterprises, and I was supposed to be the one who had earned her place here. "I can explain," I said, but my voice cracked. I cleared my throat, trying again. "The contract's not final. It wasn't signed. I was waiting for clarification on—" My father cut me off with a hand, firm and dismissive. "Waiting? While the board thinks we're handing out divisions like coupons." Brandon chuckled, almost politely. "Don't be so hard on her. She probably thought she was helping." The room laughed in silence. No one else dared speak. And that, somehow, made it worse. I turned toward my mother. She stood just inside the door, arms crossed, dressed impeccably in charcoal gray, as if she'd walked off a magazine spread. Her face didn't move. No furrow in her brow, no flicker of sympathy. "Evelyn," my father said, glancing her way, "tell the board we'll reconvene in 30. She nodded and left without a word. He turned back to me. "We're done here. You'll receive formal notice of termination this afternoon. Dad, you no longer represent this company." And then he walked out. For a moment, I stayed in place, hearing only the soft creak of Brandon's chair as he rose and collected his folder. As he passed me, he leaned in just enough to whisper, "Told you this wasn't your game." When the doors shut behind him, the room felt cavernous. The rain still whispered against the glass, but it didn't feel like sound anymore. It felt like pressure. Later that afternoon, I was back in my office, my soon-to-be former office, packing what little I had allowed myself to personalize. A photo frame, a potted succulent, 2 pens I actually liked. That's when my mother stepped in, heels clicking softly against the hardwood. She looked at the box, then at me. Her gaze swept the room like she was inspecting damage. "We raised you better than this," she said, her voice even, almost gentle, but only on the surface. There was no hug. No, "Are you okay?" Just judgment wrapped in silk. I didn't answer. I couldn't. She left, the door clicking shut like punctuation at the end of a failed sentence. I walked out of that building with a file folder pressed to my chest. It wasn't much, but inside was the original version of the contract, the one I had drafted, revised, and saved, the one I knew by heart. I booked a cheap hotel downtown, nothing fancy, just quiet. I needed quiet. That night, I sat on the edge of the stiff bed, the hum of the air unit filling the room with a kind of white noise that felt strangely comforting. I opened my laptop, pulled up my original file, and laid the printed copy beside me on the bed. Line by line, I began to compare. Clause 7.3. Asset valuation. In my version, $84,600,000. In theirs, $42,300,000. I blinked. Went back. Font mismatch. My document used Calibri, the one they printed for the board, Times New Roman. Wording, too. Phrases I never used, tones I never write in. I kept scrolling. My heart beat in a rhythm too fast to be healthy, too loud to ignore. This wasn't my work, and then it hit me. This wasn't my mistake. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on the stiff mattress, wrapped in hotel sheets that smelled faintly of bleach and air conditioning. My laptop rested on my knees, the screen glowing dimly in the dark room. The cursor blinked on the open contract file like a ticking clock. I watched it, not as an invitation, but a dare. Find the truth, it seemed to say, or give up trying. Grandpa used to say, in business, the devil hides in the details. I had always assumed he meant competitors, auditors, legal loopholes, not my own brother. The file I had submitted was clean, tight language, calibrated numbers. But the document the board had seen was another story. There was no question they'd been different. What I didn't know was who made the change or how. I clicked into the file's properties. Most executives ignored metadata, but I wasn't most. I'd spent years making sure every clause, every timestamp, every edit was verifiable. Scrolling down the document history, I paused. Modified, 2:03 a.m., 2 days before the board meeting. User, B. Chen Admin. I sat back in the chair. My heart didn't race. It just thudded, heavy and slow like a gavel coming down. Brandon. Of course he had access. He was Knighton's golden boy, the heir apparent. Admin privileges weren't just handed to him. They were built in. Still, I needed more than a username to fight a family empire. I needed someone who had once sat behind the curtain. So I called Derek Hayes. We hadn't spoken in months. He'd been head of IT at Knighton until Brandon quietly pushed him aside. No announcement. Just a change in title. Then a change in location. Basement storage, if the rumors were true. He answered on the second ring. His voice sounded older than I remembered. Lauren Chen, he said. I figured I'd hear from you. Can we meet? Sure. The old Pine Street diner still makes terrible coffee. You buying? I smiled for the first time in days. Always. The morning was crisp, the kind of Manhattan fall that makes you want to walk nowhere in particular. But I had a destination and a reason. When I got to the diner, Derek was already there, wearing a faded sport coat over a company-branded polo. His salt and pepper hair was longer than I remembered, and his eyes had that sharp tiredness of a man who still noticed everything, even when pretending not to care. You look like someone ran over your future, he said, sliding a cup of coffee toward me. That's because they did. He didn't push for small talk, just waited. So I pulled out my laptop and showed him the file metadata. He leaned in, adjusting his glasses. Well, he said, Beechen admin. You don't say. Is that what I think it is? It's exactly what you think it is. Brandon had override access to all contract files. They never revoked it, even after he moved off the ops side. I stared down at the steam rising from my cup. So he could have changed the numbers and made it look like I did. Derek nodded. And no one would know unless they were watching the server logs. Which they weren't. Which they never are. He paused, then reached into his coat pocket and slid over a cocktail napkin. On it, scribbled in pen, was a path. Server 02, Archiv Profs Logs November 19. That's where the audit trail lives. If you can get a copy of that folder, the story changes. I nodded. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, just don't get caught. He smiled, but there was no humor behind it. Back at the hotel, I sat at the tiny desk beside the window and opened a secure terminal. The Knighton servers were built on a fortress, but I still had valid access credentials, at least until HR got around to cutting me off. My fingers moved fast. I navigated to the logs folder Derek had written down. The screen flooded with timestamps and user actions. And there it was. User, Beechen admin action, modify file, contracts RQ4N Maritime Division. Agreement, timestamp 2:03 a.m., November 10th. He didn't even bother to mask it. That's what arrogance does. It leaves footprints. Big ones. I downloaded the relevant logs, encrypted them, and stored them across 3 different drives. I wasn't naive. If Brandon was willing to sabotage a $42 million deal, he was capable of worse. A text pinged on my phone. I looked at the number. Unknown. No contact name. Just a blank screen and one sentence. Don't fight this. You'll lose everything. For a long moment, I didn't move. The phone stayed in my hand, the message glaring at me like a loaded statement, daring me to respond. But I didn't text back. I didn't delete it either. I just placed the phone face down on the table and looked out the window. The skyline blinked in and out through the fog. Yellow cabs crawled below like sluggish insects. Somewhere down there, people were moving on with their lives. I had no choice now. This wasn't just about reputation. It was about survival. But not in the desperate sense. I wasn't falling. I was loading the first piece onto the board. They hadn't beaten me. They'd just made the mistake of letting me live through it. You can't play fair in a game designed to keep you out. So I stopped playing fair. A month after the boardroom betrayal, I left Manhattan. Not in defeat, at least not entirely, but with a single suitcase and a plan that was still mostly a hunch. I boarded the Northeast Regional to Boston with a coffee that tasted like paper and a trust fund I never knew existed until Grandpa's attorney called me, quietly and without ceremony. He had left it for me in the event of professional separation. His words, not mine. It wasn't extravagant, but it was enough to seed something of my own. Boston was cold in a way that bit through your sleeves, but it also had space. Space from Brandon. Space from Evelyn's calls. Space from the name Knighton, which still burned the back of my tongue. The Seaport District, with its uneven sidewalks and slate-colored water, became my new base. I signed a lease on a third-floor office above a sushi shop. The windows looked out over cranes and cargo in steel containers, the bones of business. On my first morning in that space, I brought nothing but a laptop, 2 legal pads, and a ceramic mug Grandpa had once used in his home study. It said, "Think sharp, speak less." I placed it next to the window. That afternoon, Olivia Park walked in with 2 lattes and no expectations. "I don't even know what to call this yet," I admitted. She shrugged, settling into the desk across from mine. "Doesn't matter. As long as we build it better." I hired Olivia because she was the only person I trusted who'd never asked me for anything. We'd met at a logistics conference 2 years prior, where she corrected a panelist on maritime taxation mid-presentation. She was sharp, and more importantly, she knew how to pivot fast. We named the company Haven Tide Strategies, a nod to resilience and the ocean we were both trying to navigate. Our first targets weren't major accounts. We went after the contracts Knighton had deemed too small, too messy, too beneath their interest. These were the overflow routes, the ports with difficult customs, the shipping lanes that required more effort than prestige, but they added up. We drafted emails with precision, pulled public shipping data, and quietly mapped where Knighton's resources were stretched. I began noticing patterns, routes Brandon's division had signed but couldn't service without delay. Delays led to client grumbling. Grumbling opened doors. One of those doors was Raymond Liu. He owned a mid-size logistics chain on the East Coast. His reputation was somewhere between cautious and cutthroat. I'd sent him a proposal 2 weeks earlier, and to my surprise, he replied with a single line, "Meet me." No fluff. We sat across from each other in a glass-walled cafe near Fort Point. He wore a navy peacoat and no smile. "You left Knighton," he said flatly. "Why?" "I didn't leave. I was pushed out." He raised an eyebrow. "And you think starting a 2-person firm in Boston is your revenge?" I stirred my coffee. Number, I think it's my correction. He looked out the window. Behind him, a tanker crawled into the harbor. Your numbers are tight, he said. Your proposal's cleaner than what I've seen from Knighton in a while. That's because I don't have to pretend anymore. I only offer what I can deliver. He studied me for a long moment. You're not what I expected. That's the point. He leaned back. Fine. You'll get a 6-month contract. Handle my Singapore route. If you can keep up, we'll talk long term. Back at the office, Olivia let out a low whistle when I told her. That's Brandon's route, she said. Knighton's been barely keeping it afloat. I nodded, watching the harbor below shimmer under winter light. Not anymore. That night, I got a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was clipped, like she was rehearsing restraint. I heard you're in Boston. I don't understand why you're doing this, Lauren. Running away doesn't fix what happened. This family, your family, needs unity, not stubbornness. Please think carefully. I played it once. Then I deleted it. By spring, we had secured 3 more contracts. Olivia streamlined our operations like a machine. Derek, though not officially part of the company, began feeding me quiet insights about Knighton's internal activity, server reorgs, last-minute contract changes, signs of pressure. We weren't just surviving, we were circling. Then, one morning, a headline caught Olivia's eye. She printed it and dropped it on my desk without a word. Who is Haventide and why are they outmaneuvering Knighton Enterprises? I stared at it, silent. The article didn't name me, but it didn't need to. The timing, the routes, the language, it all pointed to one undeniable truth. I was no longer invisible. Brandon would read it. He would recognize the strategy, the precision. He'd know exactly who taught me how to play this game. But what he wouldn't know, what he could never guess, was how far I was willing to go. When you stop asking for a seat at the table and build your own, people stop seeing you as small. They start wondering how you got the blueprints. By fall of 2021, Haventide Strategies had 5 desks and too few chairs. We ran on caffeine, short deadlines, and the kind of quiet momentum that feels like it's going somewhere. Our office overlooked the Boston harbor, and every morning I'd stand by the window with a coffee in hand, watching the ships roll in like measured breaths, calm, but never still. Brandon's voice used to echo in my mind, "This world isn't built for you." It didn't echo anymore. We had just secured our 5th consecutive contract, 2 of which used to sit comfortably on Knighton's balance sheet. Not anymore. Olivia had grown into her role with a kind of unshakable focus. She ran logistics like she was orchestrating a symphony. Each container, port, and clause played on time. We didn't waste energy on publicity. We let the results speak, and they did. Raymond Liu had begun to send other clients our way, unspoken endorsements layered into casual introductions. He never said much, but his quiet nod at the end of a deal felt more valuable than any handshake from my father ever had. One morning, Olivia dropped a file onto my desk. "You'll want to see this." Inside were 2 internal Knighton contracts Derek had quietly funneled from the archive servers. The first was ordinary, amendments, client payment terms, but the second caught my eye. It was a shipment record labeled Private Maritime HK Transfer. Unusual volume, no client signature. But the biggest red flag was the approval line, signature B. Chen. I stared at it for a long time. "Brandon?" Olivia asked, hovering. I nodded. "He signed off on a shipment that never went through customs." Her eyebrows lifted. "That's not just sloppy. It's potentially illegal." I didn't say more. Not yet. I didn't have enough to act. But the current was changing. That afternoon, Raymond called. "I've got something," he said. "What kind of something?" "A Pacific trade lane. Massive. Knighton's been fumbling it. Too slow, too bloated. You want in?" I straightened in my chair. "How soon?" "Bidding ends next week. You'll need to move." "I'll send over our framework by tomorrow." He hesitated, just long enough for me to notice. "What?" I asked. "Just wondering if you're ready for this scale," he said. "I wouldn't be on the phone if I wasn't." There was silence on the line. Then, finally, "It's yours, Lauren." "Knighton can't deliver. You can." I set the phone down, stared at my reflection in the screen. It was the biggest contract of my life, logistically, financially, symbolically. I didn't feel excited. I felt still, like standing in deep water and feeling the shift beneath your feet. That evening, Derek emailed another file. No subject, just an attachment. I opened it. It was a spreadsheet, dozens of entries, vendor names, offshore transactions, flag routing codes. At the bottom, a red cell highlight. Payments routed through Shell Corp. Linked to Maritime HK transfer. I leaned back in my chair. The lights outside had dimmed, casting our office in soft amber. Olivia had gone home. The space was quiet except for the sound of my fingers tracing the edge of my keyboard. On my screen, Brandon's name sat open in a browser tab. Not a coincidence. I'd been tracking Knighton's public filings, and his internal decisions left a trail if you knew where to look. I caught my reflection in the window glass, just a figure in the glow, shoulders squared, eyes calm. "He still thinks you're gone," a voice inside me whispered. But I was here. I had always been here. The difference now was I wasn't playing defense anymore. The first thing I noticed at the lawyer's office wasn't the storm outside. It was the silence inside. No one turned to acknowledge me when I stepped through the glass doors of Wallace and Associates. Not Brandon, not my father, not even Evelyn. I might as well have been a ghost. The conference room smelled like leather and old paper. Heavy rain streaked the tall windows behind Mr. Wallace's seat. He was already there, adjusting his glasses, flipping through a thick envelope with the firm's embossed seal. I sat at the far end of the long table. Brandon was at the head, where he clearly believed he belonged. Evelyn sat beside him, perfectly still, hands folded on a black clutch. My father, Richard, paced slowly behind their chairs like a lion in an exhibit. No one said a word to me, and I said nothing to them. Mr. Wallace cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, this is the formal reading of Mr. Thomas Chen's final will and testament." His voice was steady, measured, like a judge with a quiet gavel. Brandon leaned back slightly, a thin smile at the corner of his mouth. I'd seen that expression before, at board meetings, family dinners, whenever he thought the game was already won. "I, Thomas Y. Chen, being of sound mind, declare the following," Mr. Wallace read. He proceeded down the list: personal assets, properties, and antique collections. Richard received the family estate in Connecticut. Evelyn inherited the art collection. Brandon nodded to himself as if mentally ticking boxes. "And regarding the control, ownership, and executive authority of Knighton Enterprises," Mr. Wallace continued. The air thickened. "I hereby leave my 55% controlling stake, along with full executive power and voting rights, to my granddaughter, Lauren May Chen." Silence. Not the calm kind, the loaded kind. Brandon's expression didn't shift at first. He blinked once, then twice, as if the words needed time to pass through some invisible firewall in his head. Richard stepped forward. "That's a mistake," he said sharply. "My father must have been misinformed." Evelyn stared straight ahead, pale, unmoving. Mr. Wallace adjusted his glasses again. "There's more." He opened a separate envelope sealed with red wax. He unfolded a handwritten letter and began to read aloud. "To my family, this company was built on sacrifice, on decisions made in silence and in storms. I watched each of you grow into your roles, some with care, others with ambition. Brandon, you were once my greatest hope, but I began to see a hunger in you that wasn't for leadership. It was for control. You pushed others down instead of lifting them up. Lauren, you were cast aside unfairly, but you didn't crumble. You built something, and you did it with integrity. That's why Knighton now belongs to you." I felt something shift, not in the room, but inside me. A slow settling, not triumph, just clarity. Brandon stood up so fast his chair scraped backward. "This is manipulation," he snapped. "She coerced him. She twisted his words." Mr. Wallace, unfazed, turned to the screen on the wall. With a press of a button, it came to life. There, in grainy but clear footage, sat my grandfather at his desk. His voice cracked slightly, but his eyes were firm. "If you're watching this, I'm gone. And I've made my choice. Lauren, you earned this, not by birthright, but by grit." He looked straight into the camera. "And to those who think she doesn't belong, I hope this reminds you what legacy really means." The video ended. No one moved. Brandon's face was blotched with color, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked painful. He turned to my father. "Say something." Richard stared at the screen for a long moment, then at me. "If this is what Thomas wanted, you're just going to let her take it?" "I'm going to respect my father's decision." Brandon's eyes burned into me. "You don't deserve any of this." I didn't respond, not with words. I just held his gaze until he looked away. Mr. Wallace reached into his folder one last time. "There's one more thing." He handed me a small black USB drive. "Your grandfather said, when this day comes, you'll know what to do." I took it without a word. Outside, the rain had thickened into a steady percussion against the glass. It didn't sound like sorrow anymore. It sounded like momentum. I left the room as quietly as I had entered. No one followed. No one stopped me. And for the first time in years, I wasn't walking out of a room. I was walking into something new. Some battles you win in public. Others you win by walking back into the room they forced you out of and taking your seat. Late November 2023, Midtown Manhattan. The boardroom at Knighton Enterprises looked the same. Marble floors, frosted glass walls. The long table where I'd once stood, shaking, now felt like just another surface. Polished, but no longer intimidating. I sat at the head of the table this time. No one questioned it. Brandon was already there, seated 2 chairs down, thumbing the edge of a folder like it might offer him a lifeline. His tie was too tight, his smile too rehearsed. On the outside, he was still composed, but I could see the cracks. The room filled quickly. Board members, legal counsel, auditors. Derek sat on my left, calm and watchful. Olivia stood by the screen, a stack of printed files in hand. When everyone was settled, I spoke. "Let's begin." Olivia tapped the laptop and the screen lit up. The footage rolled, silent but undeniable. Timestamp. 2:03 a.m. user, B. Chen admin. Brandon sat at a terminal, typing. The screen mirrored his actions. Line by line, Clause 12.2 of the maritime contract was altered. Valuation dropped from $84 million to $42 million. The cursor blinked, then the file saved. No voiceover, no dramatic music, just evidence. Derek stepped in next, placing a printed server log on the table. "These are pulled from the company's internal archive," he said. "Cross-referenced with security clearance logs. The edits were made using Brandon's administrator account." Brandon laughed lightly, too lightly. "This is a smear campaign, an overreach. I was reviewing the document, not finalizing it." Derek didn't flinch. "That's not what the metadata shows." Olivia handed each board member a folder. Inside, you'll find compiled complaints from clients Brandon handled during that quarter. Missed shipments, pricing inconsistencies, even contract duplications. I looked around the room. No one spoke. But no one defended him either. Then the door opened. 2 federal investigators entered, professional and precise. They introduced themselves, presented credentials, and confirmed what we already knew. An inquiry had been ongoing for weeks. Brandon's name had come up repeatedly in connection with misappropriated funds and falsified contract reports. The board chair, a man named Keller with a hawk-like stare, turned to the room. "Shall we vote?" One by one, hands went up. The motion passed, unanimous. Brandon was removed from all leadership and decision-making authority, effective immediately. He didn't shout. He didn't protest. He stood slowly, straightened his jacket, and looked at me. "You think this makes you worthy?" he asked, low and bitter. "No," I said, "but it makes me ready." He walked out. No handcuffs, just silence. And sometimes that's a greater punishment. After the room emptied, I stayed behind. I walked to the head seat, my seat now, and rested my hand on its back. The same leather, the same stitching. Only now it no longer symbolized exclusion. It was possibility. Then I climbed the stairs to my grandfather's old office. The sun had broken through the clouds, casting soft golden light across the room. The desk was clean, except for one item placed in the center, a folded envelope with my name written in his handwriting. I opened it slowly. "You won, Lauren. Now lead with honor. This is just the beginning." I sat down, the city stretching wide beneath the windows. Some legacies aren't built in loud moments. They're built in the quiet ones, when you choose clarity over chaos, control over revenge, honor over noise. And finally, I understood. My grandfather didn't just leave me a company, he left me a challenge, and I was ready. Sitting alone in my grandfather's office, his final letter still open in my hand, I realized this journey was never about revenge. It was about remembering who I am when no one is clapping. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is rebuild quietly with grace, even when the people closest to you shut every door. Family may fail you, but integrity, resilience, and kindness will carry you further than bitterness ever could. In this life, we don't always choose our circumstances, but we do choose how we respond to them. If this story touched something in you, I hope you'll take a moment to reflect or share your thoughts with someone who needs to feel heard.